Hello, I'm Becky. I'm a compulsive overeater. Really lovely to be here. Thank you very much for asking me along. Yes, always good for me to do some service and remember that I'm a compulsive overeater, what it was like and what happened and what it's like for me today. When I was asked to do this chair and they said 30 minutes, I was just like, 30 minutes? I can't talk for 30 minutes. And then I remembered how much I like talking. So hopefully I won't talk for more than 30 minutes. Would the person who's the timekeeper be able to just give me a couple of nods? Would you be able to give me a nod at 10 minutes, 20 minutes and 5 minutes before the end, please? Thank you very much. Okay, so I was asked to pick a theme and I really racked my brains. I didn't know, there was obviously the usual ones like surrender and fear and honesty. And what I've actually chosen is the value of experience. I read a couple of pages of the big book every day. And one of the bits that always sticks out for me is, I think when they quote, is it Henry Ford says there's, about the value of experience. And I think that's definitely been something that I've found incredibly valuable in my recovery. I came into OA in 2008 in October. And I think came in sort of naively, firstly, I think because I desperately wanted to lose weight. But I also had this very, very deep feeling that there was something not quite the same as me, for me, as other people. And I was lucky enough to have been 12-stepped by a friend of the family who was actually in different fellowships than this one. But everything that he shared with me about how he felt about himself and the lengths he went to satisfy his addiction just rang bells with me, because I did exactly the same with food. He also did focus on the reaction to life stuff as well. And he said to me, don't be surprised if you sit in drafty church halls and hear people talking about their life. You will find recovery, just stick with it. My experience in recovery, obviously it hasn't been a straight line. I've had many sponsors since I've been in. And I'm grateful to say that each one of them has given me whatever it was I needed at that time. And I'm grateful for every single one of them that I've worked with. I think in my naivety, I used to think I would come in, I would get a sponsor and they'd be my sponsor for the rest of my life. But that hasn't been the case. And it's actually benefited me. What I have learned is that nothing is wasted in this program. And the experience is how I learn. I think sometimes I don't know there's a line there until I've actually crossed the line and I feel the discomfort. And that's definitely been my experience when it comes to things like working out which foods, the more subtle foods for me were, just not an option anymore. The obvious ones I knew when I came in, but there was more subtle ones, and also just being really open about behaviours as well. For me, this addiction is not just substance; it's definitely behavioural and ritualistic. I had lots of rituals around my food, and I came in pretty much broken, and I tried to just have an open mind. That was what people said to me, just to be open-minded, honest and willing. So that's what I tried to be. And I still need to be open and honest and willing. My experience before recovery was that I just didn't feel like I fitted in. I struggled with life. I was completely baffled by it. And I used food to look after the part of me that didn't know any other way. I had a counselling session with a counsellor after I'd started my recovery, who had said to me that I did have quite a difficult childhood. Unstable childhood is what I would say I had. Very unstable and very erratic. And she said to me, Becky, you found a way to cope with a very difficult situation. Clever girl. And that made me cry, because I'd never thought of it as that I'd reached for something as a coping mechanism, and that, now, and at that point, it wasn't working for me anymore. And it really was that simple. And I needed to find another way. I needed to find another way to cope with life. I needed to find a way of letting go of all the past that I was still clinging on to. And this, 12-step program gives me that. My concept of my higher power has changed and evolved over the time that I've been in recovery. And my story also includes a 3-year relapse, which at the time I was in it was pretty horrific, but I still kept coming to meetings, and that was my saviour. I knew in my heart there was nothing that was going to fix me. There was nothing that, no other thing was going to fix me. That the 12-step program was the only thing that was going to make a difference in my life. So I'm grateful that I carried on coming to meetings, but I don't regret having my relapse, because I learned a huge amount from it. I made some notes here on the desk, and all they're doing at the moment is serving to confuse me. So I might just put them to one side. So I started working the steps after about 3 months of being in recovery, and my time with my first sponsor was about 2.5 years. I did an epic step 4 that took a hell of a long time to share, but that was the right thing for me, because it really showed me how I was living my life and the beliefs I had about myself that just needed to be broken down, because I really thought my people pleasing was me being nice to people, and trying to make everybody okay, when actually I realized, what got uncovered was codependency and manipulation. I shifted from living in a mode of being a victim and thinking life happened to me, into a way of realizing that I had a choice. Recovery gave me a choice, not just with whether or not I put that food in my mouth that I knew there were going to be consequences, but also I had a choice of how I behaved, how I reacted. I had a choice even about whether or not I carried on with a thought that came in. I've accepted over time that my first thought is normally one that comes from self, and mostly self-centered fear. But recovery's given me the choice as to whether or not I continue in that vein, or whether or not I turn it over to my higher power. For me, the antidote to self-pity is gratitude. If I can sit and count my blessings, I soon realize that whatever it is I'm feeling sorry for myself about, it's just a story I'm telling myself in my head. In the first few years that I was in recovery, my food got better, but I wasn't abstinent, not continually, not cleanly, but it was a lot better. The binging stopped, because I was very much a binger and dieter. I was very much one of those people that did the two, swung from the two to the two extremes. And I tried all of the things that a lot of us have tried: the slimming clubs, the self-help books, the crazy meal replacement things. And I honestly thought that the answer to all my problem was to lose weight. I thought if I lost weight, everything would be okay. And the interesting thing for me was, for the first 2.5 years, yes, some of the weight was released. Like I say, I didn't have that back-to-back kind of clean abstinence. I don't think I'd got really honest about my food at that point. But then my second sponsor started taking me through the big book, and that really helped, because I started to understand that the program needed to be studied. It needed to be understood. And I started to learn about not just the physical allergy, but the mental obsession, and the importance of me keeping myself well spiritually. I started to understand that I could be abstinent but be completely mad as a box of frogs if I wasn't working my spiritual program and working on my emotional sobriety. And for a while there, everything was going really well. I was getting to 3 meetings a week. I went into another fellowship because I started picking something else up. And yeah, everything was peachy. I was on a roll. And basically what happened, we hear a lot in the program about it being a 3-legged stool, and I started to focus a little bit too much on the physical and not so much on the spiritual and the emotional. And unsurprisingly, I fell off the stool. One of the things I did write down here was complacency. And that's where I got to, because the gift of this program was that I was having a life. I was present. I was enjoying my life. My relationships were getting better. I was eating 3 meals a day. I was fitting into clothes that I hadn't fitted into for a long time, or ever. And then, so on some level, I think I must have still had that deeply held belief that if I lost weight and I got to a certain size, that my problems would all be solved, because I did get cocky. And I started to be like, oh, well, do I need to go to this meeting? Do I need to do my step 10? Do I need, and I can easily get cocky and a bit bored with the repetition that is required in to work the program. But I've learned a lot of things from going into my relapse, because that happened very slowly. It was very insidious. And the interesting thing was I picked up the first thing because I was people pleasing. I was scared of what my boss would think of me. It wasn't even about the food. And that really showed me that how important that emotional sobriety is, because eventually, people said to me afterwards, it's like the food's the last thing to come back, and that was definitely the case for me, because I'd stopped doing all the things that helped me cope with life. I'd stopped relying on my higher power. I'd gone back into my self-will. And eventually the food caught up with me. And my relapse lasted 3 years, and my pride kept me in that relapse for the length of time that it lasted for. And the rationalization and justification that I had during that time, for the first 6 months, it was like, it's okay because I'm not eating sugar, it's fine. But I was hitting all of the really heavy food. And then when I did pick up the sugar, it was like just every now and then. And then it was more than every now and then it was every day. And then I was back on binging. But interestingly, the thing that made me realize I was in real trouble was when I went on a detox, another word for diet. So that was the thing that brought me up sharp and made me realize that I was in big trouble.
It's just past 10, Debbie.
Thanks, Linda. And I realized that I needed help. I felt like I was in this black hole, like this, and I was reaching up, but I wasn't willing to take the hands that were reached out to me. And somebody said to me, and I apologize for swearing, but somebody said to me in a meeting, Becky, you cannot save your face and your arse at the same time. And that is so very true, because it was, I was sitting in meetings pretending everything was okay. I wasn't being honest about what was going on with me. But basically, I was drowning. I was drowning in my own self-pity, in my own spiritual bankruptcy, and I was also drowning in the food. And I needed to go through that experience, because although it was like, theoretically, I had my step 1. Theoretically, I'd done the work. I'd written my step 1. I'd handed it over to my higher power. I'd said the 3rd step prayer. I had done my first step 4 and 5, but I didn't have that deep experience, that deep knowledge, that deep knowing that I am a compulsive overeater, and there is absolutely no amount of length of abstinence, weight loss, whether I can quote the big book back to front, doesn't matter. I am still a compulsive overeater. and I needed to go through that relapse to really get my step one. You know, I learned things like the importance of practice, because the amnesia that I had every time I used to pick up the food, because I thought this time it will be different before I came into recovery, is the same amnesia that will tell me, oh, I'm all right, I don't need the program, I'm all right, I know that bit of the big book, I can just skim read it today, you know, I don't need to continue learning. My God, I absolutely do need to continue learning. I need to stay teachable. You know, one of the things that I've learned from this program, and I say that a lot, one of the things, there are so many things, is the importance of humility and being teachable. Because I realized as soon as I think I've got it down, as soon as I think I'm there, I am exactly not there. I am far from being anywhere. I am in trouble. And it's time for me to get honest, because there's obviously something that I'm not being honest about. I can still feel avoidant about going to meetings sometimes. I can still find it a bit of struggle to pick up the phone and make an outreach call. And that shows me, I know now that there's something that I'm not being honest about, because I can't sit in a meeting and not tell the truth. I can't speak to my sponsor or fellows and not be honest about what's going on with me. So this part of me wants to avoid it and run away. I am cross addicted. I do have other addictions, and the experience of my recovery that I've had so far is that I've learned all of these things about myself. I've learned what feels safe and what isn't safe. I've learned that I do have a choice if I put that food in my mouth, or if I engage in gossip, or if I do something that's dishonest, but I've got to deal with the consequences. I remember sitting in a meeting once and hearing somebody saying, you can summarize the 12 steps in 2 words: grow up. And that was the truth for me. I didn't take responsibility for myself. I didn't want to deal with the consequences of my actions. I would always want to be thin, but I wasn't willing to give up the food or do anything differently. The program has taught me so much about myself, about relationships, about life. You know, I call on the traditions a lot in my working life, you know, principles before personalities when there's a disagreement in a meeting. And, you know, for me financially, I need to be financially self-supporting. And that's something that I still struggle with sometimes. And that particular area I find hard to bring my higher power into, but I'm a work in progress and I'm still working on that. I need to do something every day for my recovery. You know, it needs to be the center and the design of my life. And there are times, being in recovery long term, there are times when I don't feel like I'm in the center of the bed. And that's, you know, when I need to speak to my sponsor, I need to up my meetings. And sometimes I don't do that until I'm literally teetering on the edge of the bed, you know. And I think I've had to accept that it ebbs and flows. You know, a lot of things in life do ebb and flow. There's changing seasons, there's the tides, all of that. Oh, I feel like I'm going to burst into a song. But it's kind of like, you know, things don't stay static. You know, I don't ever arrive. I'm never going to graduate from this program. And I remember my first sponsor, who I wasn't working with at the time of my relapse, she said to me, Becky, nobody gives you a gold covered big book and tells you to go and sit in the corner in that rocking chair because, you know, you've done the work and you're all right now, because it isn't the case. You know, as I say, my recovery sent me into other fellowships, and it's kind of like being an archaeologist. I've got to just keep digging. You know, each time I've worked the steps, my understanding and my faith has got deeper. You know, there's curveballs that come into life. You know, I went through that kind of fallacy of thinking, well, once I'm working the steps, I'm going to meetings, I'm sponsoring people, and I'm working with my sponsor, and all my ducks are in a row. That means life's going to be great. In the same way, I thought that about, you know, my weight loss, but it wasn't. Life is life. You know, it's there's ups and downs, there's difficulties, there's good times. You know, sometimes I'm climbing the hill and sometimes I'm on the flat, and that's okay. And I've had to remember how to enjoy the times when things are good and not sit there and worry about when's it going to start going wrong then. And also trust and have faith in the times when it is difficult, and lean on my higher power and my fellows, and know that there's something for me to learn from whatever that experience is. I have a good friend in this program who says we never outgrow it, and that is very, very true. And it comes to mind quite often for me when I think, you know, when I get that little like, oh, well, you know, maybe I don't need to be so thorough on my step 10 tonight. Step 10 and step 11 for me are the key to my sobriety, my emotional sobriety. And without my emotional sobriety and my spiritual connection, abstinence doesn't come, because it is a gift. And I know now that if I am taking a little bit too much interest in what's on somebody else's plate, or I'm manufacturing reasons to go out to eat, then there is something going on with me that needs to be looked at. I need to lift up that rock and see what's underneath it. I don't do it perfectly. Sometimes I'm resistant to it for a few days. Again, it might be even more than a few days. It might be a week. But that discomfort that I have, and that's something I have definitely learned, is that the pain that I was in when I first came into recovery was deep and despairing. The pain that I feel now I'm in recovery and I'm doing my program mostly okay, the pain is now just discomfort. And I have an amazing capacity for feeling a little bit shit. And I know this about myself now. And I know that if I am feeling like that, no, I can't, it's not good to sit with it, even though it seems to be a bizarrely familiar state for me. I don't, you know, my higher power doesn't want me to just feel a little bit rubbish every now and then. My higher power wants me to be happy, joyous and free. And that may not be every single day, but...
20, Debbie.
Thanks, Linda. And it's mostly, I'm mostly happy, joyous and free. You know, I am grateful and I feel very blessed. You know, I have space in my life today for experiences, and my thing with experience now is pushing myself, like trying new things. I spoke to my best friend today about going on the zip wire. I think I'd be terrified, but do you know what? I'm going to do it. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's my age. I hit a big milestone this year, and I just thought, do you know what? I'm just going to try it and trust that I'll be all right, you know? And if I fall out and hit the rocks, then it's obviously my time. But I can honestly say, and sorry, this might sound a bit morbid, but I do actually feel that today I have a life that if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I wouldn't regret the things that I haven't done, because being able to make amends to my family and friends and to people that I cross paths with through this program, I have peace of mind about my past today. Being able to look at my behaviour at the end of each day and work out if I do need to make, you know, say, apologise to somebody or change my behaviour, then, you know, that gives me peace of mind. And none of this is possible without me experiencing the discomfort of making a mistake or crossing a boundary that I know I shouldn't have crossed. You know, even when my head is telling me, you're playing with fire there, Becky. If I step over that line, then I feel that discomfort, and that discomfort is the lesson. I am one of those people that pain is part of my learning. That's just the way I learn. But before recovery, I wasn't even willing to step out of that comfort zone. I wasn't even willing to risk speaking up in a meeting or, you know, putting myself out there. And I think a lot about recovery is about learning how to be vulnerable and not editing myself and not limiting my life because of fear of what other people think of me or what might happen, you know. And that for me is faith. You know, there's been times in my life in the last 12 years since I've been in the program when I've needed to make some pretty major decisions, and it is a leap of faith. It literally, one of them was like running off a cliff completely naked into what potentially could be freezing cold water on the other side. And it was a leap of faith. And do you know what? I trusted my higher power, and where I landed was way better than where I thought I would. you know, I have a job today that I love. My relationship with my husband is so much better than it ever was before. I spent the weekend with my mum, and that is a huge gift of this program, because before recovery, she left when I was 4 and I hadn't forgiven her. And because I was able to forgive her through steps 4 and 5 and through my amends 8 and 9 and changing my behaviours in 6 and 7, I have an amazing relationship with my mum today. And I realised that a lot of my feelings towards her weren't mine. They were other people's. And that was just, to get that separation was just such a gift. So I can honestly say that, yes, I came into this program because I was desperate and overweight and couldn't stop overeating, and I couldn't stop dieting, and I couldn't stop putting unreasonable standards on everything that I did. I planned my life, but I never did anything. I never took action. I read the first 3 chapters of every self-help book, and after that, it just went back on the shelf, because they were the points where it wanted me to do something. I was like, oh, no, do something, change something? No. But today I feel like I can take action. I can take risks. I can be vulnerable. Because my reliance is, I would say, it's not 100%. It's maybe 90, 89, 90% on my higher power. There's still areas where I need to bring my higher power in. There's still areas where I need to, you know, really turn my will and my life over. But I really do have a life that I never thought I would have. You know, my limited beliefs, I couldn't imagine my life without excess food and dieting. I couldn't imagine having a close relationship.
5 to go, Debbie.
Thanks, Linda. I couldn't imagine my life without, you know, gossiping as currency at work. I couldn't imagine my life without needing to earn a huge amount of money, or, you know, being in all of those sort of material trappings. But today, my life is rich. It's rich with love and joy and experience. You know, the value of experience for me is that I learn when I do, and when I go through, and when I come out the other side. You know, I can read the big book or other OA literature until I'm blue in the face, but sometimes I need to actually, well, all the time, I need to experience things. And I'm grateful I have a sponsor who gives me the space to do that. You know, she kindly and lovingly guides me and suggests things, but she lets me trip over the rock or fall down the hole, and talks to me about how I can get out, you know, using this program. But yeah, it's a joy to be in this program. It's a joy to have this, you know, this community in my life. And one of the many gifts is that I've learned these days to observe myself rather than judge myself. You know, when I am wavering a little bit, rather than being like, well, I should know what to do. I should know, you know I've been here long enough, blah, blah, blah. I just step back and say, okay, what's going on with me? Is there something I need to look at here? You know, and actually turn that complacency or that criticism into compassion for myself. Because I don't know about you guys, but my goodness, I was ever so critical of myself. And I'm grateful today that that's not the case. So, yeah, my recovery is not a straight line. It's a crazy, interesting, colourful ride. And I hope it continues to be that way. And I thank you again for letting me share.
Wow, thank you so much, Becky. That was incredible. I've heard your story before, but fantastic. Oh my goodness. So as I've just posted, we will now open the Q&A section of the meeting. This is also being recorded. So if you have a question for Becky, please post this into the chat to our host Kara, and she will ask them on your behalf. So I'll hand the rest of the meeting over to Kara.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Becky. That was incredible, incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us today. I am just waiting for some questions. So if you have any questions in the, I'd like to put them in the chat. I have one. Becky, how did you finally get back from your final relapse?
I think I hit rock bottom again, but I think the main thing for me was that I needed to go back to being a newcomer. I didn't want to completely dismiss everything I'd already learned, because again, value of experience, but I really needed to go back and kind of set aside everything I thought I knew about recovery and really open my mind to having a new experience, you know, be a newcomer again, listen, you know, open my mind to reading all the literature as if I'm reading it for the first time, you know. And to be honest, the sponsor I had at that time gave me a very structured way of doing the program, you know, 2 calls a day, 2 pages of the big book a day, prayer in the morning and the evening, 10 things on my gratitude list every night. And yeah, even though I'd worked the steps before, I knew I had to go back to the beginning. And it was a very humbling experience, but it was definitely what I needed to do, was just to set aside everything and be a newcomer again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. How do you keep from becoming complacent in your recovery?
Again, I don't do it perfectly. There's definitely times when I feel it creeping in. I think one of the biggest things that stops me being complacent is sponsoring, because I don't feel that I can ask my sponsees to do things that I am not willing to do or I'm not doing. You know, I have 2 sponsees, and one I've been working with for about 5 years, and the other one I've been working with for 2 years, and bless her, she's on a very similar journey as I was. Epic step 4, step 5 taking a long time. But I think working with newcomers and making calls to newcomers is really important as well. But also, I think when I first came back from relapse, my sponsor said to me, you've got to make 2 calls to newcomers every day. I have to remember that I am still a compulsive overeater. And yes, I can wax lyrical to a newcomer, no worries, you know. But actually, I do need to also speak to people who are in recovery long term as well, and talk to them about what's going on with me and be honest. Because yes, I need to give and be of service, but I still need to go to meetings where I'm receiving something too, you know. So it's just remembering, I think, that I'm only one bite away, or one, you know, sort of very slippery slide into, you know, not doing the things that I need to do. I think it's, yeah, for me, it's, I need to do those things every day, you know, however I feel about it. Get on my knees in the morning, get on my knees in the evening, do my step 10, you know, do my gratitude list, you know, and I text that into my sponsor every day that I've done all my suggestions. And if I haven't, for any reason, I'm honest with her about that.
Thank you, Becky. Okay, a couple more questions here. Thank you for sharing. What are some of the exercises you do to hand it over to your higher power? I ask because I find I slip into self-will so often. How do you stay in God's will?
Okay. Let me think. I mean, inventory is really important to me. Again, I don't always do it perfectly. Sometimes I just scratch the surface, but then start feeling the discomfort of not going deep enough with it. So for me, handwriting my inventory feels more powerful than like typing it up or filling in a form. I've tried a few different ways over the years, but actually handwriting it in the 4 columns really helps me. And even though it is repetitious, it's it still helps me see what my part is. Sometimes I go a bit further. One of the things that I do is I might think about what my core belief is that's actually triggered this behavior. You know, is it the belief that I'm not good enough? Is it the belief that I'm going to be treated unfairly or something like that? But one of the most powerful things that I've done is to actually write out, after I've done my inventory, what would God have me be in this situation? You know, I use the fear prayer from the big book, you know, so literally I do get on my knees after I've written out fears, and I will say, God, please take away my fear of whatever it is. And I will always be specific and direct my attention to what you would have me be. And that's a really powerful prayer for me. So taking it one step further, I will then sometimes do some writing about what I think, you know, what I think my higher power would have me be. And maybe I'll stop before I do that writing and just sit quietly for a minute or two and try and connect with my higher power. The other thing is to actually just be honest with another person, you know, as it with step 5, you know, that I share my step 4 with my higher power and another person, because sometimes just keeping it to myself and my higher power, I can still be in a bit of delusion. I can still be in a little bit of denial. Being honest with somebody else is a really good way for me to let my higher power in. And then it's just having a conversation with my higher power as if it's my friend. You know, I sometimes talk to my higher power when I'm driving in the car, or, you know, even in a moment where I feel panic or worry, I'll just literally say in my head, God, please show me what to do here. And if I am in some really difficult thought patterns, you know, if I'm being triggered and I'm going into like, I'm, you know, cultivating a resentment, or I've seen red because somebody said something at work and I just want to react, I will just stop, take 3 deep breaths and just say, God, I believe you can restore me to sanity. Because, you know, so many things for me, if I'm not trusting my higher power, it's because my step 2 needs looking at again. Am I limiting my higher power to having human traits? Am I not asking my higher power for enough? And that sounds crazy, but if my higher power is all powerful, if it is infinite, then I should be able to ask for anything. I'm not really one of those people that says, oh, please find me a parking space, because that does feel a little bit bad. But I will ask for, you know, help so I can help others, or have the peace of mind to be present, those sort of things.
Thank you, Becky. Next question. How did you find out what worked for you in terms of food?
It was a bit of trial and error, to be honest with you. Yeah, it was a bit of trial and error. When I came in, the obvious things I knew I couldn't eat safely. And I don't say I can't eat something because I'm an addict. And as soon as somebody says, you can't eat something, I go, well, I'm gonna, you know. So I say I can't eat it safely because I can eat it. I'm an adult, I can make that decision. But what I can't do is I can't eat it safely. So that's the first thing, was changing that language. And then there were other things that I found, that if my behavior around a particular food was not sane, like I was trying to cram it into every meal, or I was going way out of my way to get that particular thing. Those of you who've heard my chair before may remember me talking about the chestnut omelette I once made. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention food on this meeting. Is that okay? Okay. So basically, Christmas, had chestnuts in my with my Brussels sprouts on my Christmas dinner, and my head went, ooh. And then after that, I started trying to have chestnuts in every single meal. And I made myself a chestnut omelette one day. I mean, who does that? That's just weird. And then there was another time where I still drink coffee. And I made my husband drive 10 miles out of the way on the way home from my sister's. We went up to Leicester to see my sister, made him drive 10 miles out of the way because I needed to go to a particular coffee shop because they had sugar-free something syrup. And of course I'm like, yeah, but that's okay because it's sugar-free, right? But to make my husband drive 10 miles out of the way to go to that particular coffee shop, that is insane. So I know that if there's insanity around a particular food, or I finish a meal and I want more of it, or I'm trying to cram it into every meal. And for me, it's not just substances either, it's portion sizes. You know, I'm not just allergic to particular food types. I am also allergic to I have an allergic reaction to portion sizes. If I go out to eat, then sometimes I might eat something that's richer than I would have at home, or the portion size might be a bit bigger. The way that I deal with that is if I walk out of a restaurant and if I feel full, or I feel, like uncomfortable, my brain is the sort of brain, because I'm wired differently, it will go, well, you've messed it up, you might as well just carry on eating for the rest of the day. So the best thing I can do in that moment is ring someone and go, I've just had a meal out, I feel like it was too much, and I just need to share about it and be honest, because if I don't, my disease gets hold of it and it snowballs something else. Oh, I got away with it last night, maybe I can get away with it again. I've got to stop that disease thinking in its tracks. So yeah, it is a lot about trial and error, because I think everybody's food is different. Everybody's reactions to certain foods are different. I have, subtle ones that can creep up on me. And sometimes I've had to change. I've been in recovery 12 years. I've had to change my portion sizes because I'm getting older. My body doesn't need as much anymore. And sometimes I'm perfectly okay with the food, and then all of a sudden it becomes a problem. But yeah, it's just really watching for that diseased thinking, that insane behavior.
Thank you, Becky. Our next one has 2 questions. 1, how do you manage your body obsession since relapse? And 2, what happened after 3 years in the food that led you back? As you said, pride kept you out.
Okay. Body obsession. I must admit, my body obsession broke a little bit at the beginning of recovery, because I used to weigh myself like 2, 3, 4 times a day, and I hid my scales for 2 years. I didn't weigh myself at all. One of the most powerful things that I do if my body obsession does come back, because I still have fat days, I still have that, and it's realizing that it is a state of mind. Because I remember having a fat day one day when I was at my sort of lowest weight, or my, most healthy weight since being in recovery. And I was having a fat day, one of those days where, everything in the wardrobe is out on the bed, nothing looks right. And my sanity kicked in, and it was like, but Becky, you've lost weight. You know that you are not overweight anymore. And that, it was like a penny dropped. I was like, it is a state of mind. And what made me realize was, actually, when I dug under it, I did some writing, I did some inventory. My fat head was because I wasn't being honest about something. The other thing I do with my body obsession is, in the same way that I pray and turn my will and my life over to my higher power, I also turn my body over. Because if I'm abstinent and I'm overweight, the weight's going to come off. If I'm abstinent and I'm at a healthy body weight, I'll stay the same. If I'm abstinent and I'm underweight, I will put on weight, because my body knows what is the right amount of food to eat. I wasn't born with that gene, so in that case, I have my higher power. So I have to turn my body over to my higher power as well as my will and my life.
All right, thank you, Becky. Next.
Sorry, I didn't answer the second question.
Oh, the second one, yeah. What led
Sorry.
you back? As pride kept you out, what led you back?
I think because I still kept coming to meetings, I was still here in recovery. So that was a really important thing for me, was that I was still hearing and seeing recovery. And interestingly, at that time, what it was coming out was jealousy. I was looking at other people who were recovering, and I was jealous of them. And now I know when I'm jealous of somebody, it's because I want what they have. So I actually saw somebody in the meeting I was jealous of. I stepped back from it, and then I asked her to be my sponsor. And it was just realizing, it was almost like at that point, if she'd asked me to jump, I would ask how high. That's how desperate I was. I needed this program. I needed to be back into it. And I knew that I could not continue the way that I was. You know, all my resentments started coming back. All the ones I'd done in my epic step 4 started coming back. And I was like, what is going on? And it's because it's a daily program. It's a daily program, you know. This program is my medicine, and I need to take it every day. So yeah, it really was being around recovery. You know, they say in another fellowship, stick with the winners, and I'm grateful to say that's what I did. You know, I was going to some meetings that were struggling, but then somebody said to me, go to this meeting, and I went. And I saw recovery. I found a meeting that had really strong recovery, and I stuck with it. Yeah, and then I just put myself out there and asked somebody to be my sponsor, and I was willing to do whatever she suggested.
All right, next question. Thank you, Becky. You mentioned that your eating got a lot better at first, although you weren't abstinent. Also that you lost some weight. Because we all have different definitions of abstinence, how could you distinguish that your initial eating was better eating, was just that, and not in fact abstinence?
I think for me, it was because I was aiming for abstinence. And at the time, the first sponsor I worked with, there wasn't any kind of like 3 meals a day, nothing in between at that time. She very much focused on emotional and spiritual recovery, and just, you know, her belief was the food would take care of itself. So I didn't really look at my food, honestly, in the first 2 years. But how it got better was I wasn't binging. You know, I didn't binge. But why I say I wasn't abstinent was because every now and then I was still picking up sugar. I was still picking up those binge foods. You know, for me, my abstinence absolute bottom lines are 3 meals a day with life in between, and none of my binge foods. But at that time, I was attempting to do 3 meals a day, but I was still picking up my binge foods every now and then. And I wasn't binging. So, you know, I naturally lost a little bit of weight. And, you know, it was better than it was, but I hadn't really looked at, until I worked with my second sponsor, I hadn't really looked at portion sizes or, you know, looked at not just particular foods, but things like, can't think of the word, not just portion sizes, but textures and behaviors around the food. You know, like picking a meal whilst I'm eating it, or, you know, that this particular like creamy and sort of sweet tasting can be a problem for me, or salty and crunchy can be a problem for me. You know, things like that. You know, I hadn't really kind of looked at everything, and that's when I feel my abstinence became kind of cleaner and more defined. I wouldn't say that I wasn't necessarily, well, I wasn't abstinent. I had pockets of abstinence, I would say, in those first 2 years, but not continual.
Thank you, Becky. Okay. How do you juggle the meetings you go to for OA and other recovery programs? I'm a double winner and find it hard to decide.
So I go to two to three meetings a week. I'm in 2 fellowships. I've just started going to a 3rd. So I speak to I've got 2 sponsors, one in each fellowship. And I speak to my sponsors, and we agreed that I would go to 1 meeting in each, but I make sure that I go to the same meetings and I'm in service at those meetings, because that was a requirement with my OA sponsor. And it's good for me because it means I get there, you know. So there's other times I might do extra meetings like this one. But yeah, there was a time when I was doing 4 or 5, and I work full time, you know, and I have, you know, other responsibilities, and I had to be realistic, you know, about my timings, because I need downtime to reflect. You know, I need downtime and quiet time to connect with my higher power, and I can be a compulsive doer. And so it's important for me to make sure that I do have more of a balance around my time. Yeah. So I just split the meetings across the different fellowships.
Thank you, Becky. Last one, we'll wrap up with this one. When you experiment with food behaviors like the chestnuts, how do you deal with the thought of, is this or that a relapse, and not get stuck in starting over and being hard on yourself when you're learning what foods or behaviors work? Okay.
So I think for that, because obviously it is about experience, and sometimes that you know, there is that sort of backwards and forwards a little bit. It's just sticking with the bottom lines that I have. You know, I don't know until I know if a food is a problem for me. So as long as I am not eating between meals, and as long as I am not picking up what I already know are my binge foods, if I discover that I now have another food that's a problem for me, I don't know it until it becomes uncomfortable and those behaviours kick in. So as long as I'm being honest about that with my sponsor, and I'm not breaking those bottom lines of the 3 meals a day and the, you know, the binge foods I know that I cannot eat safely, then I have to go through that experience to realise there's a problem with that particular food. And then I can be honest about it. The other thing I would say is it's not up to me to battle myself to stop eating it, because this disease is bigger than me. So I need something that's bigger than it. And that bigger than it is my higher power. So as soon as I realise I've got a problem with a particular food, I will get on my knees and I will ask my higher power to take the desire away for it. And that works for me. It might take a few days. It might take a week or a month, but the desire will be lifted. You know, if I am willing to not put myself in a position where I'm trying to eat that food, or, you know, and I'm turning it over to my higher power.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Becky, for being of service to our meeting today. You're just absolutely amazing. We've had a request, and I've opened the chat up, if you would be willing to share contact information in the chat. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ellen.